making, a really extreme effort to be available and answer questions on issues that are topical and important. We're excited we have a really big group today, and we're thrilled to be able to use this forum to connect with you all. So, there are a number of different topics that we're going to want to address through the course of these different webinars. But today's topic is HISA's Anti-Doping and Medication Control Program, which, as you all know, established the first ever thoroughbred uniform national anti-doping program. It took effect in May of this year, and it's, as you all know, it's run by the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit. There were a number of questions that came in for this webinar that were not related to the ADMC program. We've sort of stored those questions, we've indexed them, we're going to be using them to inform future topics and future conversations. So today we're going to be limited to the anti-doping questions. So we're joined today by leaders of the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit. They are the independent anti-doping agency for HISA, and they're going to be available to answer a lot of your questions that came in around the nuances and the operations and the particulars of the program. So it's my pleasure at this point to introduce you to HiWU's Executive Director, Ben Mosier, who's going to introduce the rest of his team.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Thank you. As Lisa said, it's a pleasure to be here today, and we fully support HISA's efforts for ongoing engagement and communication within the thoroughbred racing industry. And so with no further ado, I'd like to introduce my team, my HiWU executive team, and we are here to answer those questions, which Lisa will be asking us as a presenter. So joining me today on this call, we have Michelle Pujols. Michelle is our general counsel, comes to us from the NBA, National Basketball Association, where she was associate general counsel and not only started but managed the NBA anti-doping program and helped prosecute those cases and run investigations as well. We have Kate Middlestat, who is our chief of operations. Kate has a long history in anti-doping, specifically in operations and strategy, but just a wealth of knowledge in all things anti-doping, and manages all of our testing operations and nationwide as we look at a nationwide testing program. Also joining us is Dr. Mary Scolay, who isn't on camera at the moment and may be working through some technical difficulties, but we'll deal with that. Mary will be joining us momentarily. And many of you already know Dr. Mary Scolay. She's been in the racing industry for nearly 40 years and serves as our chief of science, not only managing science questions, working closely with the legal department, but assisting with ongoing education efforts and managing our lab accreditation program. So with that, we kick it back over to you, Lisa.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. So we want to spend the bulk of our time today answering your questions. Many of you already submitted questions in advance, and so we'll be starting with those. But if you have questions you'd like to ask, you did not submit ahead of time, please select the questions panel on your desktop app or click the question mark icon in the toolbar, and you can enter your question there. And then I'm told that those questions will miraculously come to me, and I will be able to ask them. So thanks for that, and thanks for making those efforts. We're going to start with, I'll start with you, Ben. If you can maybe start by sharing with our audience some of the resources that are available to actually learn about HiWU, learn about the rules, and to essentially be better informed that HiWU is making available. That would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things to talk about here. We've taken several approaches to education and certainly open to new suggestions on education. But right now, we have two main sources of education for anybody to look at, and that's through the new HiWU app, which we just launched a few weeks ago, and through our website. And so we have a lot of resources, including what we call one-pagers, trying to break down parts of the rules and explain those as easily as possible. but also other resources on there to take a look at. But our app also links to the website to look at those resources. But most importantly, with the app is a substance lookup function that anybody can log in and type in any substance, and it will tell you if it's banned, if it's controlled, as well as public detection times, and possibly what the other names of that substance may be out in the field. So take a look at that when you get an opportunity. We're also, we went on an in-person education trail before the launch of the ADMC program. Dr. Mary Scolay visited over 40 tracks leading up to the launch. And we are definitely open for continued in-person education opportunities. If anyone would like for that to happen, all you have to do is ask, and we can make that happen as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. Michelle, turning to you, can you explain how the provisional suspension system works for banned substances, and in particular, the recent modification that was made through guidance on enforcement?
Sure. One thing I want to specifically say, because I've gotten this question a lot, is the provisional suspensions generally only apply in the anti-doping context for banned substances and banned methods. There are limited circumstances where there'll be a provisional suspension on the controlled medication side for a controlled medication method, but for controlled medication substance positives, there are not provisional suspensions that are issued. I'm sure many of you are aware that the provisional suspension rules were revised somewhat at the end of July. And so provisional suspension for presence cases relating to banned substances, it generally, unless one, the banned substances for a specific list that has been considered more significant substances, so amphetamines, opiates, other things like that, or if the person has more than one anti-doping violation charge or notice pending, that person, when they are provisionally suspended at the service of the notice, that suspension can be postponed. I mean, if they request the B sample to be tested. And so if while the B sample is being tested and before they get the results, they are not provisionally suspended. It is a postponement of that, and that is indicated on our website. And then when the B comes back, if it is negative, obviously the case would be dropped. If it's positive, the provisional suspension would be actually in effect against the person until the resolution of the case. In addition to changing the rules as to when there would be an immediate provisional suspension and not a postponement, we also changed the rules relating to what could be done during a provisional suspension. Although it remains the fact that a horse, the covered horses of that person cannot breeze or race unless they are transferred, the covered person is allowed to continue caring for and exercising their horses. That was made specific in the new policy guidance. Although the person must take down any or cover any personal signage bearing their name related to their operations at any racetrack that they're located, and they cannot claim covered horses or bring new covered horses into their barn, and they cannot be employed in any capacity involving covered horses during the pendency of their provisional suspension. And as I said, this new change, the person can request the B, and they're given 7 calendar days to pay for that B sample, because under the regulations, the person is required to pay for the B, and just note that if the B comes back negative, that amount will be returned to the person immediately.
Okay. And how does that differ, Michelle, from a final suspension? I think it's important that everyone understand the provisional suspension is not a finding of guilt. It's an interim period during the pendency of the case, and there's a very serious violation against the covered person. When there's actually a final decision, and a final we call ineligibility period, a final suspension, how is that different?
Well, for a final suspension, I mean, they will be required to transfer their covered horses to another responsible person during the period of that ineligibility.
Okay, so that's I think an important difference. Since we're on you, I'll put you on the hot seat for one more question, which is, can you explain the public disclosure process and where people can find, I guess, essentially the listing of cases and pending cases on the HiWU website?
So on the HiWU website, on the right-hand side, there is a tab called Public Disclosures. On that page, there is both a pending page and a resolutions page. And they have all of the information that we are required under Rule 3610 to disclose. The way that it works in terms of when things need to be disclosed is different for a case that it involves a provisional suspension. For a provisional suspension, that disclosure has to happen at the imposition of the provisional suspension. So that will be at the time that someone gets a notice letter, and that will be up on the website. In terms of things where there is not a provisional suspension, if it is a presence case, so a case relating to a positive test or an adverse finding, that information is not public until after either the responsible person waives the analysis of the B sample or the B sample comes back positive. And if it is a non-presence case, so in case, ones that are up there now, an intra-articular injection, that case will actually not be public until the charge letter is filed against that person, because there's not a provisional suspension involved, and it is done a little bit later, but not that much later from a presence case.
Thank you. Moving to Mary. Mary, what specifically has been done to harmonize lab testing nationwide under the ADMC program, and how is that important for the industry?
Well, important for the industry, the first thing is that the promise of HISA was uniformity, and so uniformity in terms of regulatory language also requires uniformity in analytical support. We have been having weekly meetings with our lab directors with the goal of pursuing uniformity, and when we initiated the ADMC program, we started with a core list of upwards of 300 analytes for which there are testing specifications, and all of the laboratories will perform to those specifications. We'll expand that list as we identify novel substances or new detections, but because there is a single client, which is HiWU, all of the laboratories' instructions come from one source, and we meet regularly to make sure that the labs are able to meet the specifications that we've set.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is, and this is probably for Kate, what is the contractual obligation of the testing labs and the return of a post-race sample, an out-of-competition sample, and a requested B sample? And why are delays in receiving results allowed to occur, and what is being done to correct this issue? And maybe we'll use Ben, because I think Kate's audio is off unless she got it work.
I think can turn me on. I'll probably turn part of the latter part of that question over, but certainly just kind of starting from the beginning, it's important to understand that that life cycle for results management really starts as soon as that sample is collected. So they can be stored securely at the track until they are shipped. And then they have transport time to the labs. Labs have a 10-day turnaround, business days, for post-race. That excludes weekends and that excludes holidays. So it can be extended beyond that. Once we receive those results back, then we will review them, and then they get reported as the final step. And that reporting for post-race could be to the racetrack or the State Racing Commission in order to coordinate the payment of prize money for negatives. And then for vets list, it's a reporting to the regulatory vet. So that time for post-vets work or clearance testing is 5 days. Again, business days is the starting point. So we know that there's been some variation over time, and some of that was just the relevant parties getting used to the reporting and the transfer of that information. but I think we've seen a significant improvement on that. And I'm going to let Michelle kind of speak to what happens with the B sample process, because that's a separate piece directly coordinated with the responsible person.
So the B sample process is something that is still in terms of the turnaround time is 15 business days, so it's a longer period of time than the A sample. That process involves when we get the request, going out to the labs and seeing what labs are available to do that B sample, and then require shipment from the A lab to the B lab, and plus under the current regulations, the responsible person who has requested the B sample to be tested, or the owner, because the owner is also allowed to request that, has the right to be there for the opening of that sample, and so that has to be coordinated also. In terms of that, we are working to make that process faster, and Mary Scole and Dirk Hunter helping with that process, and that so that is where that stands right now. That process has also, I think, gotten better since we've started the program. So we're always working with the labs to try to get things done as efficiently as possible. I don't know, Mary, if you want to add anything about that.
Okay.
I think I am, Lisa.
So yeah, go ahead then.
The last part of that question, what is being done to correct the issue? We are continuously evaluating, monitoring, and trying to speed up this process, working on efficiencies with the labs and the reporting process. But coming down the pipeline soon as well will be an automated reporting function, and working on what exactly that looks like. But in concept, people, reg vets, bookkeepers, others that are given cleared test results specifically will have the ability to receive automatic cleared results in a much faster time frame. So that is another step we're looking at to make this better.
Great, thank you. Going back to Kate for a minute, Kate, I think it'd be helpful if you could explain the procedures in the test barn, particularly the use of gloves and buckets, and essentially what the requirements and procedures are, so that there's an understanding around that.
Sure, Lisa. I know this has been an area of a lot of questions from the horsemen, and so we've been providing additional support to the test barns to make sure that we're seeing consistency and compliance. I think the most important piece is to understand that the hygiene throughout the sample collection process is really important. The controls over the sample collection equipment prior to collection are significantly different than they used to be as well. But during the sample collection process, I think the key around gloves is to understand that those should be worn by the sample collection personnel collecting and handling urine samples, but that for a vet collecting blood, they are not required. It can interfere with their ability to, tactily accomplish what they need to safely draw that blood. So there is a distinction between urine collection and blood collection when it comes to the requirement around gloves. They are single-use disposable gloves that sample collection personnel would be changing prior to the collection for each horse. For the buckets, those are provided at the test barn for post-race testing, and those are sanitized and disinfected between each horse. So when a horseman arrives at the test barn, they will be assigned a specific bucket. That bucket will be disinfected prior to their arrival, and then we work with them to ensure that their horse is drinking only out of that assigned bucket. And then throughout the day, the sample collection personnel are disinfecting work surfaces, making sure that they're ensuring that the test barn, the stalls, et cetera, are also clean and prepared for the next horse.
So just one quick follow-up to that, Kate, because listening to you and you distinguish between urine and blood, I sort of immediately think, and I'm sure others do too, well, okay, of course we don't want the vet to be slipping when he or she is drawing blood, we want them to be able to do their job properly. Does that in any way compromise the integrity of the sample? Are we not worried about contamination if they're not wearing gloves and they draw blood?
We're not, because it's considered a closed system. Those of you who are familiar with what a blood tube looks like, the needle is going directly into that tube, so there's not the same open system that there is in a urine collection cup.
Thank you, appreciate that. Let's move on now to the atypical findings policy. Mary, do you want to explain the atypical findings policy? Then I'll ask you a couple specific questions about it.
Sure. Am I unmuted?
You're good.
Oh, okay. There's a surprise. Yes, the atypical findings policy is largely modeled on a system used by the FEI, the Federation Equestre Internationale, which is the equine competition world outside of horse racing. The specified substances are largely substances that are found either as constituents of plant materials or whose exposure to a horse is most likely the result of bedding or feed, as opposed to a willful administration of a substance. And so the specified substances are identified by the laboratories as atypical findings, and that atypical finding triggers an investigation that takes place before a determination is made if a violation has occurred. If a determination is made that the exposure was the result of exposure through feed or bedding or one of the sources clearly beyond the control of the responsible person, that finding is reverted to negative and there are no consequences to the horse, the responsible person, the owner, or anybody associated with that particular sample.
And I believe there's 28 substances that we currently have on that list. Is HiWU or HiSA, well, I guess I can also speak for HiSA, how do new substances get added to the list and what are the criteria?
So it's my understanding that HISA's Anti-Doping and Medication Control Committee undertakes review of all of the regulations, not just the atypical findings and the specified substances, and in consideration of intelligence received, input from stakeholders, new science, that list can be amended, either substances added or removed. And so I believe that process is currently underway with the ADMC.
Yeah, that's correct. I just want to lay that foundation for the next question. We love your dogs, Mary. We always want to have them part of our every town hall. They always love to bark at just the right moment. So one question that we had was, we continue to see adverse analytical findings called on substances widely known to be in the environment, such as metformin. Will there be a consideration of the expansion of the atypical findings list to include such substances? I think we addressed already sort of how that happens, but I think it's probably important to potentially explain the difference between the environmental contaminants and human medications coming into a horse's system. And now you're on mute, Mary. It's your favorite topic.
Okay, unmuted, and advance warning, there will be barking. I've got no control over those guys. Yes, HISA has adopted the IFHA's definition of environmental contaminants. Environmental contaminants are substances present in plant materials conventionally grazed by horses or incorporated into feed or bedding through cultivation, harvesting, processing, or storage. And so it is a far more limited definition than has been accepted generally by the racing industry, and so there's been an educational process involved. The introduction of foreign substances into the horse's environment is, whether it's through a groom urinating in the stall or somebody rinsing their hands in a horse's water bucket, that does not meet the IFHA's criteria for environmental contaminants. So the introduction of substances into the horse's environment that way can be introduced in a hearing and considered by the hearing officer, but they are not inherently environmental contaminants. The environmental contaminants are a limited subset based on plant material or feed or bedding through the through the whole process before it gets to the trainer.
I just want to make a quick reminder to encourage people to ask questions. You can click the question mark or use the questions panel to type in a question. So,
Lisa, I wanted to make one little point about the atypical policy, just so everyone knows. So, under the atypical policy, if after the investigation it is determined that the finding is negative, and it is not going to be pursued as an adverse analytical finding, but it's going to be considered a negative finding, that is not publicly disclosed, and under the rules, neither HISA or HiWU can disclose that information without consent of the responsible person involved, which would obviously different if it's considered an adverse finding. It'll proceed along just like a regular adverse finding does, with a notice and then a charge.
So I know that we can't, disclose the particulars of the atypical findings policy. That would obviously undermine the whole, goal behind the policy, which is that we're not going to publicly disclose cases that are not genuinely violations, because that would be obviously unfair to the covered persons. But can you give us an idea of how many atypical findings you've actually noticed since HiWU came into effect on May 22nd?
There are about between 15 and 20. Some that are still currently being investigated, and others that have been determined to be negative findings.
Great, thank you. We got the following question in, and I think it's from, well, I know it's from Mary. Can you clarify the rules for administration of electrolytes, such as Enterolyte, prior to a race, including by nasogastric intubation? Definitely not for me. Turn your volume on, Mary, your audio.
I'm muted. Okay. Yes, electrolytes. There has been clarification recently issued, and that clarification is as follows. Electrolytes can be administered orally, so top dressed on the feed, mixed in with the feed, administered by paste or drench gun up to 24 hours prior to a horse's post time. So if you want to use Lifeguard or Electrolyte and you want to give it orally, you can do that up to 24 hours. The use of a nasogastric tube to administer electrolytes takes that administration out to 48 hours. So if you're going to tube them, it's 48 hours. If you're going to give it orally, paste, mixed in with the feed, it's 24 hours. You are also able to administer unsupplemented isotonic electrolyte solutions intravenously up to 24 hours. The use of salt and mineral blocks is permitted at any time, and horses can consume free choice electrolyte solutions in their water at any time.
Thank you. We also received the question, what are the steps that are done to change the rules or get new rules approved? So I'll take that one, because that's really a HISA question. So just for everyone's benefit, HISA has two standing committees, the Racetrack Standing Committee and the Anti-Doping Medication Control Standing Committee. And those are the committees that essentially draft and create and ultimately modify the rules. We're going through a very comprehensive review of the racetrack safety rules right now. We've posted them a number of times on our website with public comment. We've sent them out to stakeholders. The committee has met probably 6 or 7 times to review the feedback that's been received. We also, anytime somebody wants to send in a suggestion for a rule change or a comment, you can send that to the sort of feedback at HISAUS.org. That address is on our website. We are constantly reviewing that. Anything that gets sent in is looked at, is read, and where appropriate is also shared with the committee. There's been a lot of modifications that have been made based on stakeholder feedback, so it's really important that we get it if you have some. There's also a horseman's advisory group that we rely on quite heavily to sort of report back to what's obviously happening in the field, what's happening on the backstretch, so that we really are able to get the information about issues that we need to be aware of, and we're constantly engaging with that group in order to do so. We're also shortly, and I've just started looking at the ADMC rules, so there's the same opportunity to feedback on those rules. But the answer is You know, we almost always have some set of rules up for public comment on our website, but anytime you can send in suggestions and to that feedback email address, and they will be taken into account. Okay, next question is, this is for Kate, I presume. Who should people report any test barn issues to if they are not following the protocol? Audio.
Thanks, Lisa. So there's a couple things to be aware of. I think the first is that if a horseman or a groom has a question during the sample collection session, they should really be raising that with the vet or the sample collection personnel that are there, making sure that they understand their rights, their responsibilities, and are getting clarification so that they're comfortable with the policies and the procedures, because we, certainly recognize they're new. So we want to make sure that in that first experience, you're understanding what's happening, and the dialogue at the track is going to be the best place to start that conversation. HiWU has a support line where we have our staff available to support sample collection personnel during all of the hours that they're doing testing. So if at any point a situation escalates that consultation with HiWU becomes necessary, they can contact us via our support line, and one of us will help clarify information or provide additional direction. There is a supplementary report form that is available as well during the sample collection session. So if at any point as the test session concludes, it seems necessary for either the sample collection personnel or the horseman, responsible person, or nominated person to record any issues specific to that sample collection, the supplementary report is the place to do that. And that can be comments that are specific to that session. So those are kind of the in the moment ways to do it. Beyond that, contact us. Reach out to our operations team and let us know what you guys are experiencing. The end result of that has been really helpful. I mean, in certain cases, there are cases where we need to intervene and review immediately, look at corrective action, have discussions with the track, because understand, just like you, the consistency and the integrity of the sample collection process is what's important to us. So we take very seriously feedback in that regard. And then beyond that, a lot of good ideas just come from horsemen asking questions, sample collection personnel sharing feedback that they hear from you. And so while it may not result in an immediate corrective action or something like that, it's certainly being used, currently to consider how do we change protocol, how do we change rules, where do we need to provide additional training, either to the sample collection personnel in the test barn or to the industry, so that they are better understanding how our procedures and our protocols work.
So I think you probably answered most of this, but there was another question that came in a different form that suggested there might have been some concerns expressed regarding some of the test barn employees and who's responsible for the direct supervision of them under the HiWU organizational structure. If you can explain kind of how that reporting mechanism works in terms of HiWU and the test barns.
Sure. So I think, of interest, we have trained and certified over 450 sample collection personnel. So that's a combination of individuals working in the test barn and veterinary staff that are both in the test barn, but also doing the collections associated with vets list work or out of competition testing. So we are directly responsible for the training and the certification. We establish the protocols, we establish the procedures that they follow, but in most cases, they do remain employees or contractors of either the State Racing Commission or the track. So when it comes to constructive feedback or follow-up regarding any concerns, we would work in conjunction with oftentimes the State Racing Commission or the track to make sure that there is kind of mutual accountability between ourselves, the sample collection personnel, and the State Racing Commission or the track that they're working for, in order to make sure that we're addressing concerns or inconsistencies.
Thank you. This is sort of a somewhat related question, but how many post-race tests have been conducted? I don't know if you have the information, Kate, or if Ben does, to date. And do we know of those, how many adverse analytical findings have been reported?
Yeah, I can take this one, Lisa. So first, I think I want to talk about public reporting because we are required to have public reporting. We're working closely with HISA and a specific committee on exactly what those metrics are that we will report. And it will be an end of year annual report, which will be very detailed on the exact number of post-race, out of comp, as well as specific substances that were tested positive for, and probably even case metrics as well on the backside. But I can say right now, in general, we have tested over 25,000 horses. That's a combination of post-race, out of competition, vets list, post-work in the first 3.5 months of this program. There are well over 100 ongoing or resolved cases right now on our website that are publicly disclosed. It does not include the number of atypical findings that Michelle said earlier. So that's kind of the general data points as it stands right now, but probably most important and what people want to see, which we will provide, is a very organized and detailed annual report after 23. But as we move into 24 and have even more data, we will likely post quarterly reports and even have a database on our website so anybody can go in and look at that data as it continues to grow over time.
And then the annual report, atypical finding information will be there, but it will not include any information about the horses or the responsible persons involved, but there will be general information about the number of atypicals and how the results panned out.
And which substances, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is sort of a follow-up. This question just came in, Ben, but I think it's related to what you just responded to, which is, can HiWU provide racing commissions, general testing numbers, and breakdown of numbers of samples submitted at a competition, TCO2 post-race? Is that sort of part of the annual report that you were referencing?
Correct. Yeah. After we come up with what our annual report metrics are going to be, we will be happy to oblige with state racing commissions on the same data.
And you're hoping to ultimately go quarterly on those, I think is what you said.
That's correct, as we move into 24 and have just an actual database being updated quarterly with ongoing data.
Great, thanks, Ben. Kate, this one's for you. We've got a somewhat more specific question, but the question is, I'm wondering how horses are picked and why for testing if they haven't had a published work and have not raced. Specifically, there was a horse at Laurel Park which tested positive for butane Robitussin. What if that horse was laid off due to injury or illness? Is a trainer fine for therapeutic medications? So maybe you can take the first piece and Michelle can take the second piece.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, we're not going to, get into specific cases, but from a selection perspective, covered horses are subject to testing, whether that's out of competition or based on entries post-race or TCO2 testing. So we're certainly continuously looking at the best ways to use all of the information available to conduct a risk analysis, make sure we're targeting the right horses at the right times when it comes to out of competition testing, using the tools of our investigative team to help inform testing. But the terminology that's pretty common is to try to find the right balance between detection and deterrence. And so that really informs how we determine and how we try to plan and organize our testing programs so that we really can maximize both of those initiatives. But I think fundamentally understanding that, covered horses are subject to testing and that we, I think, are putting a higher emphasis than many states or tracks might be used to on how to use out of competition testing to the full advantage. And that obviously takes a different strategy than what most would be commonly used to, really just from a post-race perspective.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to also just emphasize, I'm sure most people know this, but out of competition testing is only for banned substances. The controlled medications are by definition allowed to be used between races, just not allowed during the race period. So if, in that scenario, if a horse is tested at a competition, laid up at a farm, therapeutic medications, controlled medications are not part of that test and that analysis.
Also, a good reminder, Lisa, that post-race and vets list are treated the same way. So all controlled medications are tested for on a vet's list, same as a post-race, except the use of Lasix, which is permitted at all times on vet's list. Mary, you were going to say something too. You're on mute.
So that testing is handled through the regulatory veterinarians. A request is made, the medication that was administered is declared, and then HiWU will double check the horse's portal to make sure that the medication is registered in the portal consistent with what's reported in the clearance request. So if anybody's not reporting into the portal, this is a good nudge to remind you to do that. Currently, the regulations do not provide for testing of horses coming into the barn. You don't know their background and you want to get them tested. We have recommended to HISA, and we are working on developing a transfer testing program such that if a new horse comes into your barn and you want to make sure that it is not carrying a banned substance that puts you in jeopardy, that there will be the opportunity for that testing to be performed for you to protect yourself.
Great.
That is under development and in process.
Great. So we have time for one last question, and I think I actually got to everything, which is great. I'm going to close off with Ben. Ben, can you just maybe share a little bit about how the investigation process works and whether or not the tip line has been successful?
Sure, happy to do that. So obviously I can't speak about ongoing investigations or any of the details of those investigations, but I can say that our investigations team has been very active in the first 3.5 months of the program, and active on all accounts. So we have several anonymous whistleblower platforms, specifically one called Real Response, which is a way to send text messages and emails anonymously and get answers from a live staff member from our investigative team. And we've had a lot of anonymous conversations and tips submitted that way. But we also, the old school way of having a call or a sit down meeting is always available with our investigative team. Our investigative team is broken out. We have our staff. We do have in-house investigators, data analysts, and really spearheaded by a 2-person team, Sean Richards and Sean Lower. But we have partnered as well through voluntary agreements with state racing commissions and some track associations as well for the utilization of their, boots on the ground investigative personnel to try to have people always on the backside, whether it's just for deterrence or barn searches, things like that. But our investigations team has been very active, and we even have a few public possession cases to show from that already.
Thank you so much, Ben. We are pretty much at time now. I really want to thank, Ben, Michelle, Mary, and Kate. I think this has been really helpful and informative. I also really want to thank everyone who joined us today for your questions. We're going to try to use this platform more regularly to address issues. If your questions came in and we didn't get to them, we will answer you. I think a few just came in recently. We're going to answer you directly so that you can still always have your questions answered. You can do that anytime, by going onto either of our websites and responding to the feedback line or the info line. We monitor those regularly. And also, please feel free to send in suggestions for future topics because we would love to hear from all of you. Thank you for, just for joining us today. This is our first town hall, and I hope you found it useful. And we look forward to seeing you in future town halls. Thank you.